Good morning, Christina.
Good morning.
Good
Can you hear
morning,
me okay?
Christina.
Yeah,
You
hear you
can?
perfect. Yeah,
Lovely.
yeah.
How are you today?
Doing well. Isn't it a beautiful sunny day?
It's gorgeous. We were just saying that. Yeah, it's fabulous, isn't it?
Yeah. How are you all?
Yeah, good.
Brilliant. Yeah,
Yeah.
not a bother.
Great.
We'll wait another wee minute just for more to join and then we'll kick off. Okay. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Navigating Growth series, the CEO Insights for SMEs. We're so glad you could join us for today's session on funding your expansion. So, my name is Joanne Creevy, and I'll be your host for today's event. So this is a limited five-part series we're running, where every month we'll tackle a new business challenge that matters to you, whether it's about funding, pricing, compliance, technology, or hiring. We're here to give you practical advice that you can actually use to grow your business. So each session is going to be a bit different, and today we're lucky to have our CEO Larissa Feeney and also our head of sales and marketing at Kenora, Christina McGreevy. Um, so they'll be sharing their expertise and insights in the session. And the best part, this is an Ask Me Anything session, so feel free to drop your questions into the chat or the Q&A, and you can drop them in if you prefer to do it anonymously. That's fine as well. So we do encourage you for your participation throughout the session, so we can get to as many questions as possible. So good morning, Larissa and Christina.
Good morning, Joanne. Good morning,
Yeah.
everybody.
Morning.
I suppose just to kick off the session, just to get your both of your take on what would you see the biggest mistake SMEs make when seeking external funding?
Would I go first?
I'd
Do
say
you want
yes,
to?
you go first,
Yeah,
Larissa.
I go first. Do you want to unshare your screen or do you have
Oh
more
yes,
sides?
sorry. No,
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
sorry, yes,
I'll be able to see your lovely
yeah,
faces much better.
sorry about
Yeah, there
that.
we
Yeah.
go.
There we are.
So the biggest mistakes that SMEs make, I think, is probably not getting advice around the type of funding that's appropriate for them at the stage of business they're at. So that's, right from startup stage right through growth and into maturity. Different types of funding are appropriate at different stages. So maybe sometimes for SMEs, they get an opportunity or they come up against an issue, and it's very much about where can I get the access to money quickest rather than what's the best way here. So that's probably what I see. Christina, what do you think?
That's absolutely what I've seen as well. You've heard some of the horror stories through the years of angel investments and angel investors, sorry, and fallouts. And as you say, that can sometimes be a quick way of getting funding, or and it's not always right for a business. I know that some of our most recent webinars on funding, we've had a couple of different advisors and a couple of different options there, and there's just such a wealth of options there. So it's about doing your research, isn't it? And
Yeah,
not jumping into it. Would you say,
yeah.
Larissa, that the best person to go to first is to talk to their accountant there, to get a good accountant and get a solid grounding? Or should they go and trust one of these, firms to direct them to the right option?
Yeah, it's a great question. It really depends on the business and the
Mm.
individual and their skills and their expertise. So definitely getting objective advice. For most businesses, that starts with usually with their accountant, or it could be sister. It's generally speaking a professional advisor that they would go to first.
Right.
Most businesses would have an accountant before they have a solicitor, so they would
Mm.
tend to gravitate towards the accountant first. Does depends on the skills of the accountant, of course, but it's certainly somebody that can signpost you in the right direction. If there's a board of directors, advisory board, or something similar, that can
Mm.
also be a good option. Or if the business is in startup phase, so if there's no board of directors, and even if there is no accountant, which can happen as well, then it's a matter of reaching out to network. And there's loads of great organizations out there that can assist with early stage funding and advice around early stage funding. And crucially as well, Christina, I would always say to speak to others who have been on the journey and who have raised either through equity or through debt or through any other methods, how they've done it and why they've done it. It may not be appropriate for you, but you learn a lot, you know.
Yeah, about the pitfalls, I suppose, in that journey, right? You know, and I know that like at a startup stage, there's a lot of supports. There's the Leos, the New Frontiers. There's a lot of direction that you can get at that early stage. But you're absolutely hit the nail on the head there, Larissa, that when you're in that growth stage and you need to go for additional funding, perhaps it's about networking with like-minded individuals. So going out and seeking out a network of some sort that you're able to go and talk to other business owners, and even almost like finding a mentor for yourself. Would you say that that's important for business owners?
Yeah, actually, you've raised a good point because there's two elements here. There is the business and there's the individual. So,
Mm.
and we always have to separate out the two. Again, you know, at startup phase, it can be very difficult. But as the business grows and becomes more mature, then what's in the best interest of you as an individual, might differ than what's in the best interest of the business. So, getting objective advice around that is really important to understand what your goals are as an individual, what the goals are for the business, whether they're aligned or whether you need to make different decisions for both. You know, there's loads of the difficulty with going with uh, whoever you go to look for advice from will have their own best interest at heart, right? So that's why you have to look for objective advice in this area. Because if you go to a venture capitalist firm, for example, or you go to a PE firm, for example, they're going to tell you what they need in order for them to give you money, but it might not be in the best interest of the business or you as an individual. So that objective advice, whether it be from your accountant or whether it be from your board or from your network or from others, has to form part of your decision making process.
Yeah. And Larissa,
Larissa,
and oh,
oh,
sorry.
sorry, I
Go
was
on.
just going to ask, there's a wee question in there, Larissa. And the question is it better to take a smaller investment now or wait for a larger one later? And how do you decide?
Oh, that's such a great
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
I get asked this all the time, right? Like, can I say that sometimes you have to do both? You know, it really depends on the business. It's very rare that you'll get all the money you need at the beginning to do whatever it is that you want to do. Because in order to do that, you're going to have to paint a picture of where the company is going to be at maturity to your investors. So that's really hard if you don't have a product or you only have an idea or you're, you know, pre-revenue or you're in the very early stages. So most companies will take money in stages. That's why there's seed rounds, there's series A, B, C, D, whatever, you know. That's why companies go for further debt, for, you know, further investment. It's because it's very, very hard to get all the money you need straight away. Plus, what would you do with it? You know, if
Mm,
you think about it, you're going to take all this money in that you might need it in stages. If you only need money in stages, then only get it in stages. That means that you're going back to the market or you're going back to the funders or you're going back to the grant funders or whatever the case might be. But that's part of the role as a business owner if you're growing your business. You won't be able, generally speaking, you're not going to be able to get them all the money you need straight away. So it is usually get some now and go back for more later, usually.
yeah.
Does that mean that, Larissa, you're, I suppose, protecting yourself as well somewhat to negotiating better terms? You know, if you go for all of it now in an early stage startup, there's much more risk, right? Whereas if you prove your concept and with a little bit of funding, and get a little further along in your journey, then at least you can negotiate more in terms of what equity you're giving up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point, and you can actually argue it both ways. And this is why it's so it's such a hard one and it's such an individual choice to make because you could argue that if you manage to get more than what you need early on, you could end up getting it for cheaper than you would later. But
Mhm.
remember that any form of equity investment is going to be expensive.
Mhm.
That's the most expensive form of funding for a business. And today, startups and indeed SMEs tend to think, okay, I need to raise investment, I need to get investors in and give away equity. But that's actually one of the last things you should consider doing because it is so expensive. Now, for a lot of businesses, particularly startups, there's no choice. You
Mm.
have to go for equity investment because the business doesn't have the capability to raise debt funding. But it's the most expensive form of funding. It will end up costing you more than the most expensive debt. So you do it, you go in with your eyes open. You know exactly what you're giving away. But yes, you're right, Christina. It could end up being better in the long run to do it in stages because you're getting a better deal as you prove the concept, as your business grows, as you prove that you can do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so would you say that when you're taking on equity funding, that there has to be something more for you in the business, like, working with someone that's, let's say you're trying to get with an investor that's going to add value to your board, add value to your business, share insights, share knowledge, share expertise, is that the best option if you are limited to going for equity investment?
Ideally, and that's usually what happens. Generally speaking, no matter what type of equity investment you get, you bring some skills into the business with
Mm.
it. If you're taking an equity investment, you always go in with the end in mind, right? What's the plan here? What's the plan to either buy the investors out, to sell the business, to swap out investors, whatever the case might be. But yes, you probably are looking to bring in something. Now, some investors come in and they don't want any involvement; they just want to be silent, and that's fine. Again, it's very individual. But you may find if you're a sole founder, for example, if you lack a senior team because you don't have the funds for a senior team, then that means you're on your own, and no one individual has all the skills to grow a business. It's not possible. You need to have that diverse range of skills around you, and that can be one way of bringing in skills. However, it is an expensive way, Christina, because you're giving
Mm.
away equity. So another option is not to give away equity and just pay for those advisors to come in a board capacity, or an advisory capacity. You're still getting the
Mm.
benefit of the skills, but you're not giving away the equity.
Okay. Okay, great. So maybe a good time to talk about debt, equity then, Larissa, and what your, I suppose, advice would be to a growing business going out there that wants to fund its expansion to its next stage, whether that's entering a new market or whether that's expanding on a product or a service. What would be your advice for going into that
And for debt funding. So
for debt funding?
if you, yeah, if you've decided that debt is an option for your business, and it might be an option if your business, as you say, is more established, has a track record, is growing, and there is potential in the market, and you've got a good relationship with your bank, and all of that,
Hmm.
right? Your tax affairs are up to date, all of that good stuff, right? Um, Debt will you'll go for grants first. That'll be your first protocol. That'll get you so far, obviously. And then your next choice will be debt before equity. So whenever you go for debt funding, again, every business is different. There's loads of options, right? Your main consideration in debt is the terms attached to the debt. So, for example, if you start with the pillar bank, so that's Bank of Ireland, AIB, for example, they currently have the SBCI offering, which is Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland, I think it stands for. And that's a government backed debt facility. The major attraction of that is the interest rate is lower, but crucially, there's a no personal guarantee up to a certain amount. Now, if you're a business owner and if you're going for debt funding, a personal guarantee is kind of a given, right? These days, it's even a given if you go for credit with your suppliers, right? You're signing a personal guarantee, which means that you will step in the event the company can't pay back that loan,
Hmm.
which is a risk, of course. It's a risk on the individual. It's a risk that many, many entrepreneurs take, but it's a risk nevertheless. Um, with the SBCI facility, there is less of a personal guarantee. I'm not going to say there's none because over certain amounts there are, but for a lot of the facilities, there's no personal guarantee. So that's very attractive. It's government backed, it's government guaranteed. So that's very attractive. So that would probably be your first port of call if that option was open to you, and if you met the requirements of the SBCI. After that, you would go to the pillar banks and see if you can get a facility that's maybe not government backed, but is provided by the banks. And then there's loads of alternative lenders. If the pillar banks won't lend to you, and they're very, very strict. I mean, despite what they say in media advertisements, they're not really open for business. Not for the businesses that you and I know.
Mm.
Our clients, the SMEs. It's very hard for a generic SME to raise money, significant money, via bank funding. but there's loads of other lending options available. There's, a quick Google will bring you to several of them. They'll all involve bringing debt into the business. They'll all involve a personal guarantee, and they'll all involve a cost. And it's about looking at what the cost is, and what the terms and conditions are, and then figuring out what's in the best interest of the business. Again, Christina, it's back to getting objective advice on this.
Yeah.
There's, from your board, from your accountant, from if you have a financial controller or a financial director, it's that skill that's needed to assess the cost of funding and how the cost impacts cash flow. Because the big difference between debt and equity, of course, is okay, equity is more expensive, but you don't have to pay it back. So it's not impacting monthly cash flow, whereas debt is impacting monthly cash flow. So that can limit perhaps other choices in the business. So what's the impact on that? So it's doing out your budgets and your cash flows for a number of months or years to understand what the impact is,
Yeah.
Larissa, there's a question here, just kind of related to what you're discussing about the different types of fundings. And would it be common to have mixed funding types in a business at one time, or does that complicate things too much?
No, not at all. And it's very common.
Okay.
It's really common. And it's actually really common for funding providers themselves to offer a mix to a business. So say, for example, you
Yeah.
might get a funder who will want to ask for equity but give you debt. So
Yes.
they themselves are mixing it up. So within the business, it's called, what you're talking about, Joanne, is a debt equity mix.
Yeah.
You might have some investors who invested in equity. You might have debt. Within the debt, you might have different types of debt. You might have SBCI. You
Yeah.
could have third-party funders. But yes, all mixed together then is understanding what the impact is, again, on cash flow and on future value.
Brilliant. There is actually a question here around cash flow. So what are the best options for bridging cash flow when future contracts are secured, but interim cash flow is bumpy?
Okay, so if future cash flow is secured,
Yeah.
then I'm taking the business that cash flow is in the bag as such. So
Yeah.
you know it's coming. You've got a contract. There's no question over it, right?
Mhm.
In that case, that's a relatively easy one, because that's a matter of going to your bank
Mhm.
and asking for some type of an overdraft facility or a working capital loan, they sometimes call them. So it's a facility that you can dip into to bridge the gap between providing the service or product and getting paid for it. And this happens a lot, where you might be paying wages on a weekly or monthly basis, for example, and you might have to wait 60 or 90 days to get paid, and you're funding those wages in the meantime. That's really, really common for businesses. But yes, the banks can step in. Now, of course, there's a cost, obviously, but the banks can step in and provide a facility. There's also the third party funders that I mentioned a little while ago. They also
Yeah.
provide facilities like invoice discounting and things like that,
Mhm.
that also provide an option, or an avenue to bring cash into the business.
Mhm.
Again, there's a cost, and it is just a matter of weighing up the cost, because some of these are really easy to get, some of them not so easy. All of them require some effort, but it is about weighing up which is more costly for the business.
Yeah. Again, so that's why it's so important to have that trusted advisor, as you say, Larissa, to kind of discuss those options with as well.
Trusted advisor or somebody objective in your
Yeah.
corner if you're not
Yeah.
skilled in the area yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that goes across every area of business, Joanne. It's not just
Yeah. Of
not just
course.
numbers.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, you're on mute
Larissa.
there, Christina.
Sorry, thanks, ladies. So it's really about sort of setting the right order there, Larissa, isn't it? So, it's all about from the beginning, it's having your advisors around you, having that circle, whether it's hiring a board, having a senior team, whatever stage that you move through to before you go looking to take on all of the equity investment and end up diluting your ownership, really. So it can seem really, really appealing, and you read about businesses, going for these huge investments, and you can understand why business owners would want to be in that mix. There's, a certain gravitas that comes with that. But the impact on the business and on the person that's putting in all this effort and growing this business, as you say, is huge. So I suppose for you, Larissa, going in and advising business owners now, where would you say to start, if you're at that very early stage?
Yeah, and what you've described there, the media attention around investment, is an important point. A lot of those companies have no choice.
Mhm.
They have to raise investment because debt would never be an option for them given the stage of business that they're at. But what I would advise is you start with your goals in mind. So what is it you want to do here? Because bringing in investment, actually any type of fundraising is hard, right? None of this is easy. So whether you're accessing grants or raising debt or raising equity, raising investment for equity, that it's all hard and it's
Mhm.
practically a full-time job in itself, and you have to run the business as well. So where does all that fit in? So it's understanding what your goals are, what's your long-term goals, what are you trying to do here? So like those companies that we see in the media, Christina, their long-term goals is massive, massive growth and scale.
Mhm.
That's hard. It's all hard, right? None of this is easy. Um, what are your goals? And it's the same if you're a more established SME. What's your goal here? Are you looking to get more market share? Are you looking to exit? Are you looking to sell? What are you looking to do? Because that'll help determine then, if you work back from there, what's your best method of funding to get there. Because if you bring in investors, remember you're selling a vision to them, and
Mhm.
their expectation is that you'll deliver on that vision. And they're backing the individual at that stage of business. Well, at
Right.
any stage of business, they're backing the individual or the individual's concerned to deliver on the vision. So you're going to sell a vision to them. Now, for debt funding, it's slightly different. You're almost providing the evidence up front that all they're concerned about is that you can repay the loan. So you have to
Mhm.
provide the evidence that the business is stable and growing and solvent and can handle the impact on cash flow. Whereas with equity, it's very different. So start with your own goals in mind and then work back from there and have the conversations. And there's a lot of conversations that have to be had, with
Mhm.
your own advisors, with your professional advisors, with your network, with acquaintances. And it can be very draining because there's so many opinions and there's so many options. And it is great for small businesses now. There are options. It's not just, well, I can't raise debt, therefore I can't grow the business. We actually haven't touched on bootstrapping as well, which is also a valid option for growing the
Of
business.
course.
You don't actually have to raise money at all. In
Mhm.
some businesses, you can do it yourself. It just means that it's slower and it's equally as hard. I'm not going to say it's easier or harder. They're all hard, but it's a valid option.
Larissa, there's a question here from one of our clients. So it's just to kind of touch on, you mentioned goals, and their goal is really to have more salons. They're established business, but their goal is to expand that. And what steps should they take to apply for funding to expand on their salons?
Okay. So salons are, obviously they're physical premises,
Yeah.
and that is sometimes easier from a debt funding perspective
Mhm.
to paint a picture around, because it's very easy to paint a picture about tangible assets. So
Yeah.
that's a building, or it's a leased building, but there's plant, equipment. It's easy in many ways, because if you're building a service, there's nothing tangible about it. So there's
Mhm.
nothing the bank can put a guarantee on as
Mhm.
such.
Mhm.
There's nothing there. So from that respect, salons are easier than services. Now, I don't know whether the buildings are bought or the buildings are leased. Same with equipment. But to me, that would be bank funding, Joanne, depending
Mhm.
on the level of funding that the business is going for. Also, how long they have been in business, what their track
Yeah.
record is. But if it's a stable, relatively reasonably strong business for at least 2 or 3 years, that you can provide the numbers to the bank, and you're not looking for, massive money, then bank funding would be the first option there. And then if bank funding is not an option, then you might have to go elsewhere. The challenge for equity investment for salons, it's a very traditional industry.
Mhm.
So that would be more difficult. Right? That's why debt funding might be more appropriate for it.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for that. There's a few questions. There's one in, and there's a few that have already put in questions before the webinar, just about, I suppose, government grants and local grants. One had a comment that Leo grants prioritise manufacturing and export. Maybe you might have a take on that, according to a phone call that they had with them. So just want to know if there's any other grants you would recommend at expansion, or even to get better cash flow and staffing.
Yeah, so local enterprise office do prioritize manufacturing and export, or internationally traded services, I think is the other term that they use. There is an element of traditional SMEs that kind of fall in between two stools, between local enterprise office and Enterprise Ireland. And that's a no, we know that. We know that there's an element of the SME community that aren't served well by government grants. So that's unfortunate. That is the way it is. Retail, for example, hospitality springs to mind. Even, you know, from the previous example around salons, that again wouldn't be well served by either local enterprise office or Enterprise Ireland. Now they will support, local enterprise office will support in the area of mentoring, for example, which is a great support, by the way, provided by Leo. Like we talked a little while ago about getting objective advice and having objective advisors. That can be a really great way of getting objective advice for free. They will give you 3 hours, I think, free mentoring under whatever particular discipline that you feel that you need it. And that's not sector specific. So that's really positive. So definitely reach out to Leo. Leo has to be the first place you go. There are limitations on what they can do, but they will do what they can. And definitely mentoring it would be a place to start with them if they can't offer you anything else. If the person who's asked the question, Joanne, is in one of the traditional sectors, then grant funding is definitely limited. That's a real issue that we have in those sectors in this country, and indeed in many other countries as well. And that's why you have to kind of exhaust what you can in the grant landscape and then move to other forms of funding.
Great.
But, you know, as you say, Laura, said that advice and mentoring support is worth its weight in gold, isn't it? You know,
it is. Like, and I mean, it is now,
so much more value even to that sometimes.
Yeah. Now, obviously, there's several different Leos in the country. I don't know. There's easily over 20. I don't know. There's one in every county. Each of them have their own advisors. So the standard is going to differ, right? But if you can get recommendations within your local area of good advisors that are attached to Leo, then you can ask for a specific advisor when you go to Leo. Be very specific about what it is that you need. Don't just go to Leo and say, help me, or tell me how you can help me.
Yeah.
Tell them what you need. Tell them what you would like, and then see if they've got anything to fit in with what you need. Always remember that it's in their remit to help you. So they want to help you.
Larissa, I know you mentioned before about government grants that it can be a bit of a process. It can take a long time, but to sort of stick with it as well, you know, the process can be long. So people can be probably anxious and nervous about that as well.
Yeah, it's a great point. It is a great point because, you know, I would have said, like, we've got funding off local enterprise office many years ago, and then in later years, Enterprise Ireland. And it always is, it is a process, and it is difficult, even the amount of time and resources you have to commit to the application form and the preparation. But it is, you always have to remember that it is taxpayers' money, and they have to protect that. And once you keep that in mind, you can understand they're not doing it to make your life difficult. They have a job to do, and yes, their job is to help businesses, but the job is to get a return for the taxpayer. That's ultimately what they're trying to do.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Is that all the questions, Joanne?
I think that is all the questions there at the moment. I grouped a few of those together because there seemed to be a bit of a pattern about the government grants and just cash flow. But if you have anything else to add to that, Christina?
For me, I think today's session has been really valuable to discuss sort of when you're going into funding, that it's all about getting the advice and getting the direction around it. It's not making sure that you're not alone in any of these decisions as much as business owners typically are, you know, on their own, or just, you know, two people that come forward with a passion. But the biggest piece of advice I think that for business owners should take away from this is having that full vision, not just saying I need funding to get me from A to B. It's knowing how you're going to go from A to Z going into your business business journey, and really mapping that out. So taking that time to have that vision for your business on what's your end in mind, what's your goal. And that's probably not easy when they're just trying to, get started, or when they're in that tough stage of really trying to grow their business and they're balancing a lot. But that's huge, I think.
See, it's really hard because you're right. I mean, it is about knowing what the goal is ultimately. It's really hard if the business is going through a difficult period, if cash flow is low. Like if cash is low, anybody on the call will understand this. If cash is low, you can't see anything else. There's no point in us talking about 5-year plans if you don't have enough money to pay the wages on Friday. That's the reality of the situation. But that also holds you back. So if you can, the benefit of that objective advice is that it can pull you out of the weeds and help you to focus on the longer term. And that's ultimately what you need to do in order to understand what the best way is to fund the business. Because there are many stories of entrepreneurs who have given away more equity than they wanted to, or they didn't understand what they were doing, or they got into bed with individuals or investors that actually they weren't aligned with. We had a case there recently where a business had to, remove their investors because actually their goals were completely misaligned to their investors' goals. So you have to be very, very careful of your long-term vision, what it is you're trying to achieve, and don't be bamboozled by the offer of money in the bank, because what's the cost of that money coming into the bank? And we are in a very strong economy right now, so there is a lot of options there for small businesses. And you're in a very good position if you're in a small business and you have offers of funding or options around funding. So getting advice around what's the best for you is a good idea.
Thank you so much. And thanks so much to everyone for joining today. We hope you found today's session on funding your expansion helpful, and you've got some new ideas that you can put into action for your business. So just as a reminder, this is a limited series. So I hope you've enjoyed today's session. Keep an eye out for our next one, which is on pricing for profitability. So it's going to be another great one. So we'll be sharing the date for that very soon. If you have any further questions or you want to chat more about this topic, don't hesitate to get in touch. We're here to help. And thanks again for being with us today. And we'll catch you next month for the next session. Okay, thanks everyone. And thank you to Larissa and Christina
Thanks
for
all.
joining and sharing your expertise. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Katie.
Bye.
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 Bye.